Окей, думаю, можемо починати.
So I guess that we may start, and just let me briefly welcome all of you in the Center for Urban History on this June evening. And today we will have a happy moment of hosting the event together with our partners from the new institution that has actually appeared, that has been established in Lviv. It's called Index, the Institute for Documenting and Interaction. We have already had the first activities in our city. They are our neighbors, and I think that they will become more and more noticeable. They also have vacancies, just in case you're looking for a job. Please follow their list of vacancies, and we're happy to host an event together, to get united, to speak about the visible things that are more or less visible for us. I think that today we will see this, all those visible elements, and thank you, Olha, for joining us, for initiating this event, and we very quickly responded and organized the event. Today we will have a talk with Kavita Krishnan, and there will be more of a talk with her later, but let me mention that Kavita is the invited keynote speaker at the conference, Ruta conference, which is the conference of the new association, which sets as the objective to deal with the academic, cultural, humanitarian field, and to change the accents, to look for new ways and new points which need to be discussed in terms of this region, this area, and generally the views of the regions, the way we outline them, and to give more agency to them, to the countries and to the regions that are located in this part of the world. That's why today's evening is another opportunity for you to somehow reinforce the new associations, new organizations that keep popping up. And it's a good opportunity to realize once again that it's important to support each other. Thanks again for coming to Bohomolta 6 today. So our facilitator will be the program director of Index, which is Sasha Dovzhyk, and let me give the floor to her. Thank you. I hope that you can hear me.
Can you hear me now? Probably, yes. Thank you so much, Mariana. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to partner with the Center for Urban History, now as the head of this new institution, and I'm forever grateful for the warmest welcome possible to Lviv for our new initiative. And yeah, using this platform, I would like to encourage you to follow us and keep in touch with our activities. And it's an absolute privilege for me to moderate the discussion with Kavita Krishnan, an Indian activist, and with Olha Vorozhbyt, Ukrainian journalist. The discussion today is called Solidarity in Defiance. And instead of introducing the two absolutely fantastic speakers, I would like to pass on this job to them and ask them to introduce themselves, so that I do not impose any vision on what they are doing. Our talk is called Solidarity in Defiance, and I think it would be very interesting to hear your vision of your work, Kavita, and your work, Olha, and how it is shaped maybe by both solidarity and defiance. Maybe we will begin with Kavita.
Yeah. I have been it's difficult to know how to begin to introduce myself, because it is in the past 2 years since the full-on war in Ukraine that my own self-introduction changed quite dramatically. So from around 1993 onwards, I had been very active in the left movement, which is in a communist party, for 30 years. And mainly I would say that began with the wish to be active against the rise of the Hindu fundamentalist right wing, which was in the 1990s when I was a young student. I was just entering graduation. So that kind of drove me to the activism and kept me there. But then in 2022, the debates that came to the fore, the connections I wanted to make between Ukraine and India and between the politics of authoritarians, including Putin and Modi, that couldn't happen within the political framework, not only of the party in which I was, but within any party in India. So that left me out of that. So I've continued to be active against the Hindu right wing, and also in trying to talk and write about what solidarity should look like and can feel like. So I think that that's basically what I've been doing these last couple of years. And I've been a feminist activist, and I still think that gender and a feminist view of the world is what, for me, probably, at least where I'm concerned, it made these connections more clear, and probably clear in a more urgent way than they would have otherwise.
Thank you so much. And the theme of solidarity that is absolutely mind-blowing for me here is that our countries are basically 9,000 kilometers apart, and still someone can invest so much and commit so much to learning about what's going on here and finding these points of connection. I didn't say that how grateful we all are for you making the way and for coming to support us here.
It's the other way around.
And passing this question now to Olha.
Actually, I'm more used to asking than to speaking. But frankly, when I was a student, I got acquainted in Kyiv. I got acquainted with also an Indian woman with whom Kavita also knows, and she inspired me so much with her knowledge of Ukraine that you have to be open to the world, you have to study it. And over the years, I also decided that I need to understand more and more India. And this has brought me to the moment where I am. So I'm a journalist, but I'm also working for the think tank in Ukrainian prison. And this is where I am researching Indian politics. And then it inspired me also to start a PhD on Indian parties. And this is where with Kavita helps me a lot, and also is my second supervisor. But actually, talking about solidarity, for me that's very important. That even when you have long distances, there's so much in common. And we will speak today. We were speaking when we were walking around Lviv. I told the story about Polish children and Polish families who were brought to Maharashtra from Lviv, for example, to Kavita. And these small ties, which are in the memory, which we need to study, they are connecting us. And this is, I think, very, very important. And researching them, we find that even having such a huge distance, we are connected, and we need to support each other. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to recommend all of you to read a fantastic two-part interview Olha has.
No, I think Denise was also the author of it.
Yes.
Wonderful. There is a extended, very detailed and very intelligent interview with Kavita in the publication called Spilne. So I would like to encourage all of you to do your research afterwards and there will be some homework for you after this event. We've mentioned the category of solidarity. And now I would like to ask Kavita and move with Kavita towards Defiance, probably, because I have this question in my mind about India, which often positions itself as the largest democracy, right? While in actuality it can be perceived as drifting to the right, and you've mentioned some parallels between Modi's government and Putin's regime, and some connections between the two autocracies. So maybe you could describe to us how autocrats basically inspire each other, and what is there in common between them, and if you feel like it, you could also comment on the recent election, which gives you hope.
I think that's really important because you know, the thing to remember is that those who are anti-democratic, they are in solidarity with each other and they are working together. So that makes it all the more very disturbing when that kind of understanding doesn't exist between people who are affected by such kinds of anti-democratic thinking and power. So about India, I would put it even stronger than you did. I don't think it's only drifting towards the right. For 10 years, from 2014 to 2024, the government headed by Narendra Modi essentially was, I mean, Modi himself is not just a Hindu supremacist leader. He belongs to an organization which is 100 years old, and which was inspired quite directly by the European fascisms of that period. So, in a very classical sense, this is a fascist leader, and his party is the political wing of a very, very sustained, persistent, I think one of the longest lasting fascist organizations in the world. So it is not just about, I won't say just, but I'll say, you know, if you look at Trump or someone, it's an individual leader around whom a politics has developed and organizing is happening around him. In Modi's case, it's not that. This is a long-standing fascist organization, which through Modi has become the person, the figure around whom they are able to realize their vision. So I used to say, you know, I still say that we are already in the Hindu nation. India began its life in 1947 as it made a choice to be a secular, you know, democratic. So it was committed to certain kind of inclusive policies. But even at that time and throughout India's freedom movement against British rule, there was a contention between various ideas. But what's happening now is that the ideas that were sort of defeated at that time, they are resurgent now since the 1990s, but especially in these last 10 years. So Modi essentially has been someone till this year who had unlimited, in his party and in his government, he had unlimited centralized power. He could take decisions which even his own party leaders would not know, except him and his sinister sidekick, Amit Shah. So these two have been together since Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, which is one of the states in India. And that's when there was tremendous violence against Muslims, a pogrom against Muslims that was organized in 2002. So Modi's whole politics has been built on anti-Muslim, hate-mongering and fear-mongering. So when he became Prime Minister in 2014, this, what had happened in Gujarat became an all-India thing. So not only did he have power in terms of decision-making, he had unquestioned power over, policing, all kinds of investigative agencies, so anti-terror agencies and so on, and increasingly all command over political funding. So he already has the support of two of the biggest oligarchs. These are Adani and Ambani. So these are, he has complete support from them. So unlimited funds. But quite apart from that, they made a law which made it possible for political funding to come in anonymously. And most of those funds went to the BJP. And it's only now that it has been revealed that he was extorting. So if he can accuse a business of corruption and send the anti-corruption agencies after them. But if they pay up to his funding, then the corruption case goes away. Likewise with political leadership. Any opposition leader, you send the anti-corruption agencies after them. If they don't want to go to prison, they join the BJP. And then of course they're not corrupt anymore. And he had begun arresting opposition leaders, cutting off the funding, freezing the bank account of India's biggest opposition party. So all this has been happening. So I said, that we are already in an authoritarian state. We are already in, a Hindu nation. The question is whether we are going to let it go on, let that, road, let the same vehicle go careening down that road, or are we going to apply the brakes and turn around? So to me, it was very clear, even 2 years back, and that's why I felt this urgency, and I felt that Indian politics, including what I used to feel very sure of, that at least left politics, would get this right, that we are heading towards what Russia is today or what China is today. And we have to learn from these models. Nothing is exactly the same, obviously, but there are many connections. For instance, this time, during these elections, when I spoke to people, suddenly I realized that two opposition leaders, important ones, Mallikarjun Kharge from Congress and Sharad Pawar from Maharashtra, so the NCP. So these two leaders made a specific comparison between Modi's India and Russia, saying we are becoming Russia. Why? Because he'd arrested all these opposition leaders. And so they said, look, in Russia you have elections, but it isn't an election because there isn't a competition, because the person in power has already chosen the opposition as well. So everything is decided. So this is what Modi wants, and he is trying to do that by controlling a media. He has complete control over the media. So the fact that, narrative, money, and the police and the anti-corruption agencies, everything is in your control. So they made the comparison, and when I went to Gujarat to investigate voter suppression in Modi's, closest aide, Amit Shah's constituency, so many people there, including people who worked with Modi's party, who were, who were their grassroots people, but who were ideologically not with him anymore. So they said, when I mentioned Russia, so their eyes would light up and they said, exactly, it's like that. So because there was an election in Russia recently and they read about it, they could kind of make that connection. What has happened in this election is that, which just took place, the results came out on 4th June, is that I think for many of us who began campaigning in the elections with a feeling of great dread in a way, because it had begun to feel as though people in India, so many of them, are supporting Modi to the extent that he can't lose. And although I knew, we all would keep reminding ourselves that opposition parties still get millions of votes, even if they lose. So it's not as though all people, all Indians, and certainly not even all Hindus, are with the BJP. But this time what became clearer as the election progressed was that that kind of blind support for Modi, whatever Modi does, he must have known what he's doing. This was something they would always say, about Modi. If Modi has done it, he must have, he must have a reason, This was something you'd hear all the time. Or you would hear, of course, no one else can win, only Modi is going to come. And so those things were no longer around. And there was anger on, about unemployment, rampant unemployment, and about a lot of other things. And what Modi began to do during the elections confirmed it, because he reacted to the opposition manifesto, which was talking about more social and economic redistribution and justice. And he went quite crazy because he kept saying, oh, they're redistributing, so they're going to take everything from Hindus and give it to the Muslims. So he began with, they're going to take your gold and your wealth. And then he said, they're going to take the chains that married Hindu women wear, they're going to snatch that and give it to the Muslims. And then he said, they're going to take your buffaloes and give it to the Muslims. They're going to take the taps, you know, on the water. So he was, you know, losing it a little and really going crazy. So the good thing is that it didn't succeed. In another time, Modi, had he felt a losing of, you know, losing of support, he would have regained that support by talking this nonsense. But he couldn't, he didn't, even though it was amplified by the media. So that he hasn't lost, he's the Prime Minister. But he is now, for the first time in his life, the Prime Minister of a minority government, where his party is in alliance with other parties, and his government relies on those other parties. So the other parties have contested elections with him and are doing business with him, and they are not very, you know, they're not democratic parties in that sense. But the very fact that his power is no longer unbridled, and the very fact that support for him, instead of growing exponentially, dropped in a dramatic way. So, you know, from being, he could have made government in 2019 and 2014 without the support of any other party. The other parties just supported him, just like that. But this time he is reliant on them. So that's a huge difference. So it's a feeling of hope, because opposition, just all of us, you know, who want to organize protests and just couldn't do it. And we had to keep calculating, can we do something? Should we do it before the elections? We have to keep deciding, and activists and so on, so many of our friends are in prison on anti-terror charges, under which they are, you know, in prison without bail for years, So every time you organize a protest on something, especially before the elections, I remember we would talk, we would discuss, and then we would say, okay, we have to decide which hill we want to die on. Because if you organize this, it's absolutely possible that you will be in prison on an anti-terror charge. So we have to decide which one, you know, what are the optics of doing which protests do we really want to, you know, do this for. And so now it feels as though we can breathe quite a bit, and the opposition is stronger in parliament and stronger in confidence, and in general it is a feeling of hope that the fight is still on, and you know, and that the fight we did for all these years hasn't been in vain. It has been able to draw some blood, so that feels really good.
Thank you. It's actually amazing the things that you've mentioned, that the fights that you are involved in at home, like friends in prison, this constant campaigning, this constant decision making about the hill you are willing to die on. And in this situation, one of the hills which you chose was actually the Ukrainian hill. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. And what interests me here is actually how a person who has so much going on at home, whose hands are full with all these battles with the far-right government, with anti-Muslim sentiments, racist rhetoric at home, how does an activist find resources to actually manifest and like enact solidarity with a people who are half a world away with us, basically?
See, there I have to tell you it's the other way around. Because, no, seriously, I'm not saying it out of politeness. I really want to tell you that when you feel that your world is India and that everything is changed so rapidly and it's feeling suffocating, what really helps is to see the connections with other fights, other people's resistance. And the fact that even, you know, what you're fighting is not just some kind of little local thing. It affects the world. So our survival as a democracy affects the world. And Ukraine's survival as an independent nation affects the world. So just being able to see what we are fighting for and how we can is life-changing. And for me, I think I can say that that is a source of great, even what I didn't expect 2 years ago, I have begun to find new kinds of sources for inspiration, even in this city. I was just telling Ola that before I came here, so I've been writing for the last 2 years, trying to figure out how to get across the ideas I was having, which in brief, what I'm trying to write about is that instead of looking at the world today as divided based on geopolitics, so America and the West and Russia and the rest, or Global South, BRICS and all of that, instead of looking at it from the point of view of not of states but of people, and people who need and want democracy and freedom, dignity. So when you look at it that way, then you kind of don't divide the globe like this, you divide it like this, and you see that inside every country, inside every region of the world, there is a battle, for justice and against justice, for equality and against equality. And that's what I want to write about. But my starting point was the Hindu fascists, okay, Hindu supremacists, fascists. So I was reading one of their leading lights who was writing in 1939, just at the beginning of the World War, and he's writing in praise of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, and saying, oh, they're doing what we should do, and the Hindu nation must be like them. So the whole idea was that you shouldn't, that in a nation there can't be any minorities. One nation, one race, one culture, one people, one language, and so on. Unspoken thing was one leader, right? So the thing is that to make that case, he also commented on the League of Nations and how international lawmaking is, it can't apply to such nations, and he specifically mentioned the policy on the minorities treaties which affected Poland. And so when I was planning to come here, a friend told me to read Philippa Sand's book, which is about how Lviv and people connected to it. Essentially, it's the birth of international human rights law. So the terms genocide and the terms crimes against humanity, these are in a sense born out of experiences of this place, this city, this part of the world. And so just reading that, it connected so directly with something which I had been working with. So I can tell you that what I get from this solidarity is much more than what I as an individual can give, because I think that this is an understanding not just which I get, but which can actually help clarify what it is we are fighting for. Because today, this is my whole, what I want my friends to see in India and everywhere, that Putin and Modi and Xi or Trump or Meloni or whoever, one shouldn't just look for superficial comparisons. Oh, these people have elections and, Modi can lose an election, Putin can't, Xi doesn't have to fight an election and so on. But more look in terms of what is the kind of world they want. And they are very clear about it. They are all saying in one voice, Modi and Xi may have a competition, they may have a geopolitical contention, but they are very clear on one thing, that they want a world where there is no such thing as an internationally accepted standard of democracy, of democratic values. It shouldn't exist. So what they want is to push the clock back to before the Second World War, where essentially it should be that if a state has the power, it can do what it likes with its citizens, or in terms of territorial expansion, imperialism, all of that. So that was a multipolar world where every pole could do what it liked. And today also that's the direction in which we are headed. And I want my friends to stop celebrating that direction and thinking, oh, how wonderful, multipolar, so, everything will be free and everyone can do what they like. But free to do what, So that, I think, is where I'm coming from, and where I think that the solidarity with Ukraine isn't something when I was arguing this in 2022 and struggling to argue it because I didn't have at that time all the information, and the kinds of prejudices were so many, and misinformation was so much, and propaganda was so much, that on every point I had to, you know, dig up and try and find research, try and find an argument that could put right a completely false notion on everything. You know, what was the Maidan, what is you know, what kind of politics does the Ukrainian government now represent? What kind of society is Ukraine? Okay, what does racism mean in this part of the world, and so on. You know, endless. But at that time, the one thing which I kept coming back to was the idea that that there is such a thing as justice and democracy, and it's quite simple. It's not really that hard to see. To try and complicate it, to try and see an entire people as a pawn for something else, that is wrong. Maybe other forces have interests of all kinds. You know, America may have its own interests, and those interests may change. Today they want something, tomorrow they may not. But that is not how you decide solidarity. You decide solidarity based on whether you feel empathy and identify with the people who want a certain outcome. And there's just no debate. There's no one in Ukraine who wants that, oh, we want a peace where we just, you know, surrender and let large parts of our people become, you know, enslaved. No one wants that. So it's quite simple. I'm not the leader of India. I don't have to make a foreign policy decision. I'm a person, I'm an individual. I'm a member of humanity and a citizen of India. What's my job? My job is not to go weighing, you know, okay, balance of power. Will this create too much balance towards Russia? Will it create too much balance towards America? That's not my job. My job is to stand with people and their lives and their dignity, and to expect the same for me. So I would keep telling them that if someone were to hear about India, and I've heard that, even recently in a talk organized by someone on India, I was asked by people who know India, but not that much. So I could see that they saw India primarily as a democracy, where there is a far-right group and all of that. But they couldn't see the urgency of what was happening here. And a lot of people are even carried away by the idea that, oh, Hindus are oppressed in India because the Muslims once ruled there. I won't go into the details of that, but that is just completely, you know, false. And the reality is that, you know, Hindu supremacist parties, our government is trying to disenfranchise Muslims, and at the same time oppressing Hindus as well, but persuading them on the grounds that the Muslims are the problem and we'll get rid of them. So suppose somebody tomorrow doesn't understand this and they say, oh, you know, Modi has won with so much votes and he must be having support. People say exactly the same thing to me about Putin. There's a person I've known for a long time who studied in my university, broadly on the left. And quite recently he said, oh no, Putin has won elections, you have to respect the mandate. So I said, but Modi's been winning, are you respecting that mandate? And Modi's really won it. Okay, Putin's election is a sham, Modi's election is not a sham, he's won it. So I said, should we all respect the mandate then and decide that we are paid by foreign agents to destabilize Modi, because that's what he's saying. So, so my thing was that it's very clear that whether they are in China or India or Ukraine, that's what it should mean, and that's what, so it isn't a question, solidarity is not really about some kind of theoretical entity. It's really, really quite simple. It is about wanting for others what you want for yourself, and wanting a better world, that's it.
From this world of finer distinctions and horizontal solidarities, I would like to return to the world of rather crude geopolitics and talk a little bit about some of our ignorances, and Olha to help me here. It's become sort of in vogue. It's become fashionable in Ukraine to talk about the fact that we need to build bridges with the so-called global south, of which India is considered part. It's for us, I think it's useful to think why now, why we have ignored this part of the world basically for 3 decades of independence and now discovered this sudden urge to group them under one umbrella. And I would like us to do some soul searching here and to think about some of the generalizations and simplifications that we are involved in when we use this new fashion and desire to discover the global south in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that the biggest simplification is just the term global south, because it's such a huge number of different countries, so yeah, it works. So I don't like it, but yeah, we still use it everywhere, and I think also Kavita uses it.
It's a placeholder term, what to do.
Yeah, just to keep everything together. But I think the main problem was, and which we, I hope, started understanding now, was our ignorance and not understanding that if we want our problems to be understood somewhere far away, we need to understand the problems of others. And this is what actually Kavita was talking about. So actually when we were walking around today, we were talking that actually there are more similarities between India and Ukraine than differences. And this is what inspired me once to study more India. Because we need to work on this ignorance, working on the past, also to learning the lessons of the past and our history. Because when I started speaking, I said about Lviv as the place from which families of these Polish citizens were coming through Siberia and then through Maharashtra, and where the Raja from Maharashtra helped them to survive actually in 1943. But when we were at school and reading, for example, Olha Vorozhbyt, do you remember? So he writes there about Bihilai plant. Yes. So this is the novel we read at, I think, in 9th grade at school or something. And the main hero there, Ivan from one of the villages, and his name is Ivan from India, because he worked at the Bihilai plant. And one of the part of this novel is about his travel to India and how he was connected to people there. And there are so many such tiny connections between us and the countries of the so-called global south. I'm speaking now more on India because I know more about India. And we just need to look for them, and you will find. Actually, Russia just like a few days ago, it struck missiles on the university in Ivano-Frankivsk. But during the Soviet period, specialists from that university, they helped to develop drilling, like drilling agencies or drilling institutions in India. So these people who live there, might be still working there, they have these connections. We just need to, we just need to talk to them, and then we will discover this world. So my main answer to this question is just we need to deepen our knowledge about each country, and to understand that if people from the other nations want to understand us, we need to understand them, we need to understand their problems and the challenges they are facing. That's it.
Final one from me for Kavita, and then I'll invite Olha to ask a question, because clearly she has more of them. And my will be regarding the left and the divisions inside the left. Here in Ukraine, after the full-scale invasion, people in feminist, queer, progressive, green circles suffered like major disappointment when their allies from around the world failed basically to support them. And it's still very hard to argue in some circles for the military aid for Ukraine. And I'm just wondering, you've also had your fights with your comrades in the left movement. is there a remedy for this split? Do you have any idea how we can bridge this gap in understanding of Ukraine's fight?
Well, I should first say that most of the time what we know about this debate on the left is from the Western left. And I think that's a very different situation because there are very well-known intellectuals there, yes. But in terms of, there they are living in societies where probably the general feeling in society is in sympathy with Ukraine. And so the left is actually an outlier, which is trying to say that the government, which is trying to lecture their own government and say you shouldn't be funding and all. In India, it's a bit of a different situation. Of course, the far right in India loves Putin, that's one thing. But even the general opposition, liberals, not the sort of flag-bearing left, not the communist left, everyone in general has a vague feeling that they don't see it. Okay, they say Russia shouldn't have invaded, but and they may not be great fans of Putin, but they are not. They don't see it as a geopolitical problem. They see Ukraine in terms of what the West wants or doesn't want. That tendency is there anyway. So from the left, the problem is that it ought to be the left which speaks out of turn, which says something others don't. And that's where it fails. So it's doing, and the left in India is not just a handful of people. Yes, these are very small forces and electorally they have shrunk a lot. But they're still, they have huge support. They still have elected members of parliament, elected members of assemblies. They still have a large number of farmers' movements are led by them, women's movements are led by them, so their influence is much wider. And for them, therefore, to not be using that influence to correct the general common sense is a problem. And in India, the media and social media space is suffused with Putinist propaganda completely. So, it ought to be the left speaking otherwise, and they're not. But I think that essentially, I really think that one has to remake the idea of what the left is or should be. What does the left want to be? So, and that's not easy, I don't have an answer. But I know one thing, that it has to be that those little debates, on the left in India at least, where oh, how are you going to define a revolution? Is this democratic? Is that socialist? So I feel that those arguments from a century ago are just completely get rid of that, and you need to put democracy front and center as something. So what is it? So the idea that democracy is just something, elections and something, and it doesn't mean economic inequality is, it happens in democracies, social inequality, state violence, all that, absolutely true. But I think the point is that you need, whatever democracy there is has been won by people, and you need to be able to fight for more and more democracy. So there's no finishing line of revolution. There's no finishing line, and it can't mean that, okay, once I cross a line, then I can just get rid of everything that went behind me, smash whatever democracy was won before that, and then create something wonderful and new. That is a model that just needs to go completely. And so basically fighting for democracy and being able to fight for more democracy, that should be what the left is. That is what's revolutionary now. And I think that I still don't know exactly how to explain this or how to. So I am in the process of trying to find a language to speak about this. But increasingly I feel that, at least where I'm concerned, I've stopped speaking only to the left. Because I feel that, what is that conversation about? It has to be, it is a conversation, after all these are issues that affect everyone. So the need is to speak to everyone, as one should, even on the left. And maybe the left eventually comes around to seeing that things are changing and that they are completely dead wrong about so many things. One small thing which I'd mention is, for instance, not small, but not directly in answer to your question, but in part related to the question you asked before about, the place, for lack of a better term, placeholder term, Global South. So one of the main flashpoints of that right now is what's happening in Gaza. And rightfully so, and rightfully in India there is immense level of pain and solidarity with that. And that has a history, because for India in its freedom struggle, for even Mahatma Gandhi, for Gandhi to understand, to see the connection between Palestine and India, because the British were essentially controlling these territories, was easier. Seeing Ukraine as the same, seeing the connection which is so obviously there, but that hasn't been, that is far less easy. So people are able to think about it only when you remind people that, well, imagine Ireland or Scotland, and then think about what it would mean if, So Ola wrote about that in the article soon after. You wrote an article in February. That's where I first read your name, actually. You'd written an article about how, suppose the British were your neighbors, India's neighbors, and they were still saying, okay, India's still part of Britain, then how would you be dealing with this? So those connections are important to make, but also that's another space where there is an artificial division created, where I see that my ability to speak about Palestine and in places where I can speak about Ukraine, that is much harder, just as the other way. My ability to speak about Ukraine in places where solidarity for Palestine is taken for granted is hard. So I think that I also am trying to learn patience there, to say that the reasons for those blindnesses need to be, you need to figure those out and address those as well, because it's crucial that we not, hold on to that, and we are able to look at these terrible events of our century and not be so uncomfortable with confronting something which may disturb our ideas of the world, that we allow ourselves to be silent or to be complicit in a terrible, terrible crime. So I think that goes for all parts of the world now. There's so many other situations which we know very little about, or barely know anything about. So I feel that it's not a question of being on the left, but I came on the left because it was the one force which was consistently defending democratic ideas, defending the rights of women, defending the rights of minorities. So that's why I'm on the left. And so that's what I want to keep doing. And if the left can do that everywhere in the world one day, very good. But if not, then whoever does it will be the new, force, whatever they call themselves.
Thank you so much. And I finally give the microphone to the expert. And Olha, could you please ask your questions that are troubling you?
Well, I will ask just one, I think, and we will have half an hour for the question from the audience, I think. So my question is probably the urgent one. So probably you've heard that on the front line we had on the Russian side we have people from Nepal, from India. Okay. Okay. So on the front line we have people from Nepal, from India, from Cuba, from African nations, which very often are tricked to get there by Russia. And actually what Russia does to them is like modern colonialism, so it uses them as a cannon fodder. But at the same time, when Russia comes to the elites of those countries, and it shows itself through propaganda that it defends, yes, these nations from colonial West. So I'm still it's still interesting how to communicate this Russian hypocrisy to these countries, which definitely have their challenge in communicating with the West, but at the same time they now are used by Russia in the same colonial way.
So in India's case, you know, what Ola is talking about, I'll tell you a little bit. See, it's in some countries, in some places, yes, I mean, people who are desperate for jobs, they are being used as mercenaries. But that's different by Russia, so because they're paid to fight. But what is happening in the cases she's talking about, including India, is that these are migrant workers who are looking for work. So they are told that you will be working, you know, you're needed as cleaners or you're needed as cooks. So they are not signing up as to the military. They are looking for work and they're going wherever there's work. And so they are offered work, they're brought to Russia. And suddenly, or even they're promised work in, say, Belarus. They are said, okay, we'll take you there, that's where you're needed. But then once they're in Russia, they're told, oh, your visa is expired or you violated a visa condition. And so you either you are put in jail for 10 years or you have to fight. And these are young men, boys, who have never picked up a gun in their lives. They have no training. And they're told, okay, you have to lay mines, you have to figure out how to lay mines and so on. So they are trying to record videos and send them home, desperately telling them, parents, you know, bring us back home, we are afraid, and we don't want to do this. So this is literally piracy. I mean, this, what word to use for this? You are human trafficking, you're just stealing people. But in India, I mean, I wrote about this a lot, and I hope that at least the opposition parties should bring this up. But it wasn't, it wasn't raised the way it should have been, you know, not at all. And that's where I really fault the left, because after all, in India, the left is the ones with the trade unions and with the concern for the workers. And these are basically just migrant workers and who were looking for jobs. So I think that these connections, and the other one which I should mention is that these big oligarchs I spoke about, Adani and Ambani, they have big, very close Russia connections. And in fact, the sanctions on Russia, so India did business with Russia, especially with oil. And in a sense, America and all, they said, yeah, go ahead, you do it, we won't stop you. So it was all done in the name of India's interests. And India's opposition also supported it, saying, yeah, I mean, if you're going to get oil cheaper, why not? So India became the laundromat. So you're taking Russian oil, you're cleaning it up, and then you're selling it to the countries which won't, you know, can't do business directly because of the sanctions. But more importantly, the one person, individual man who won a huge windfall through this arrangement was one of these oligarchs, Ambani. Literally, one man. So, you know, the opposition has been talking about this crony relationship between Modi and them on so many other fronts. But on this front, they're silenced because they think in that same old geopolitical way about it's okay, you know, India should have its own interests, it should be friendly. Russia and India go a long time back, Soviet Union goes such a long time back with India, things like that. So I feel like even those relationships are things we can recalibrate. So I'll just mention, she mentioned the Bhilai steel plant. I didn't know about that book, but that's where I grew up. I grew up in Bhilai is a town in central India, and the steel plant there was set up with Soviet collaboration. My father worked in the steel plant, and when he was a new recruit in the steel plant, he was brought for training to Kiev. So he, you know, I still found among his papers, he's no more, but I found among his papers, you know, he's kept all he could from the city. And he used to talk to us about how much religious diversity there was in a place where you couldn't express it easily. So, you know, the clothes he wore, it's a South Indian kind of dress you wear at home, a lungi. but that is something a lot of Muslims were in several parts of the world. So in one family he said, oh, they took him aside to ask him, are you Muslim? And he said no, but then they, so they showed him that, we are Muslims and we worship and all of that. So he was full of those stories, and I feel that today, if I were to look back at that connection and think about that, then I could either say, oh, we had such a wonderful relationship with Russia and the Soviet Union, or I could think that my father knew people, Ukrainians. He met Ukrainians. He came here, the people he knew today, their families would be still here facing that. So that's a different way to think about that relationship, rather than thinking that this is a reason to somehow be soft on something terrible.
Exciting connections. I hope that you have a chance to visit Kyiv as well, bring your stories home. And now we have time for a Q&A with the audience. So those of you who have questions, please raise your hands. And I can see the first question already from Anya.
Kavita, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to meet you. And my question is about the legacy of racial dimension of colonialism and how it creates the dynamics of solidarity right now. From personal experience, I know that for people, for example, from South America, when they hear Ukrainians using the word colonialism to explain their relations with Russia, for some people it can sound as if white people are claiming the term and blurring it, saying like, okay, everyone was colonized and we are also colonized. And I understand this tendency to resist it, because racism is still a big issue in the global politics on personal level as well. And I feel that it also creates a lot of barriers for people to understand each other. And what advice you can give to Ukrainians when they talk, for example, to people from India, how to explain this? And what do you think also, maybe it's two questions, another, what do you think about the term colonialism? Should we invent another term to explain our relations with Russia, or should we work with that one? Thank you.
Should I answer that or wait? No, that's a really interesting question, and I can only tell you my instinctive response to these questions when they come up, because I don't look at them as someone who's a historian and a theorist. But to me it seems that colonialism, for one thing, I think that racism is something, for instance, a lot of people in India wouldn't understand because you assume it's linked to color. But we all know, we should know that it's arbitrary. There isn't such a thing as race. It isn't based only on something visible or not visible. It is completely arbitrary. And so it hasn't, to me, someone who is, say, from, the Georgia, certain parts of Georgia, they appear white to me. But in Russia, they would not be white. Everyone knows they're not white, and they're treated differently. So I think that the kinds of, colonial power, imperial power, there are some ways in which it behaves in a common way. So I don't think, I think it's very important to recognize what is in common rather than expecting everything to be, see, for instance, South America's example and India's, or South Asia's, they're very different, very different. They've started at a different time, and you can't make, that experience which South America has faced is a much more open plunder violence in a way in which, say, in India, the nature of British colonialism was different. Its politics was different. I don't say it's better or anything like that, but its politics was different. The way it presented itself was different. Than some kind of plundering ships of one time or slavery. Similarly with Africa, you didn't have from India you didn't have people being enslaved. You had bonded indentured labor, but you didn't have. But you still are able to talk about all of them as forms of colonialism. So you should be able to do the same when it comes to Eastern Europe. And so I think that the need to look at these categories, I see no need to invent a new category. I just feel that the need to allow people to think about, you can't say, okay, you are appropriating the idea of colonialism. This isn't about white people at all. It isn't about that. They were not oppressed or colonized because they were white. So that was not, they were not seen as white. There was a reason for the colon. And for one thing, even in terms of, basic information, accuracy, they weren't white. I mean, Crimean Tatars were not white, right? So to see how the relationship with the Russian Empire was and then with the Soviet Union was, I think we need to think of it more in terms of power rather than just in terms of identity.
Down.
So it died out, I will be speaking loudly.
There is a problem because the translator cannot hear us.
Yeah, I know. So why don't they just use it?
Maybe this one works.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about democracy in general and media. We know that media, they basically maybe not control, but they saturate everything. So you can't really get out of this. For instance, most of the Ukrainians, they don't know that the largest minority in Gaza was Ukrainian and females. Basically, this information is not made public. Nobody talks about Gaza in Ukraine, basically just avoiding the issue. But then my question is, if the world is made by media, then how you can actually talk to people in a different way? Natalie, who is here with us, she said once, she told me about the beautiful tradition of Democracy Festival in the north of Europe, that people get together and dialogue during some period in various places, in various countries and cities. Do you see any possibility at all to kind of counter media dominance, to make like horizontal links that people can get back to these, let's say, human issues of not just equality, but as you say, democracy, that they are aware of power function and so on. Thank you.
See, right now I'm in a place where I appreciate even a flawed independent media so much. Okay, so I feel that even if that media, I feel like the media in India, the completely rotten shape it's in, where it is literally most of it, television media especially, is a propagandist for hatred, for the worst kinds of values. There is a difference between that and say, the BBC or the Washington Post or whatever it is. The countries in which there is an independent media, that media is flawed, that media has its biases, that media tells you a lot of lies, but it also tells you, there is a professional way of functioning where you're able to point out when it does something wrong. And I feel that, the problems are, in India, everyone says, oh, the media's, telling you the truth, right? But in America, where there is a free media, Trump supporters say, oh, the media's a liberal, they are lying, that's fake news. And so the real news is what people tell each other. So I'm very wary of saying that there can be people-to-people connections only. I think that anywhere, it is about trying to hold ourselves and our media and elected representatives, everything, to a certain standard of, you know, how you judge information, because there's always going to be a way to suffuse. I mean, I see that on the left. I mean, the left used to be the place where, you know, people felt, okay, that's where you get the truth. You know, you go to the left websites all over the world, and they will tell you the truth which the, you know, the Western media is hiding from you. But on, I mean, on Ukraine and on Syria, oh my God, I mean, it was frightening, the extent to which then those of us who thought that we are a community were able to speak to each other across countries and we share values. It was frightening to see the extent to which we were believing something that was completely dangerous and false. So I feel that even whether it's our own community and our own kinds of counter communication and media, or whether it is big media, we just have to just, you know, be a little skeptical probably, and be skeptical in a positive way. You know, not just believe what we want to believe, maybe.
There was a question.
Okay, thank you, Kavita, for coming. Thank you for everything you are doing. I was also happy to see how Modi's party was shrinking in the elections, especially in places like Uttar Pradesh, where it tried to stir up this Hindu nationalism on steroids to an absolutely grotesque way. But still, sometimes, yes, we cheer, for instance, that Erdogan is losing local elections, Orban's allies lose Budapest. But still, these authoritarian right-wing conservatives, they are still in power, yes? And what was in the media after the Indian elections, in the international media at least, what was covered broadly was that, for instance, Arundhati Roy was, they resurfaced this trial against her. And is this a part of a bigger crackdown on dissidents within India? And maybe it's part of this, you know, like, so Modi is punishing Indians for not being loyal enough. And given the fact that he was taking credit for everything good that's going on in India, that ranging from putting the spacecraft on moon to, I don't know, distributing food packages with his face, who will he blame for everything wrong that's going on in India? And what are probably the strategies for the progressive and democratic forces now to not let India to go further in this Putinist direction? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I should also tell you that Modi was said, you know, throughout that he stopped the war in Ukraine for a while. He stopped the war. Did you know that? Yeah. He said, I can't. And he was asked by media people, and he said, you know, people asked me, what is that? You made a call? You just picked up the phone and you spoke to Putin? Really? And I said, yeah, why don't you check my call records? He said, like, he's been speaking on a mobile phone. You know, so it was, so he said all these things. So he has a lot of those claims. I think that you're so right to have brought up Arundhati Roy. What's interesting is that she's, the cases against her were originally brought at a time when Modi was not in power. So it was about her remarks on Kashmir, and her solidarity with Kashmir was what was the issue then, but then the government then wasn't really keen on acting on this then. So, I mean, it wasn't, it had no power, that particular case had nothing, you know, so they had charged her with sedition. And sedition as a law was a very sort of vague, loose law, and, you know, no one, they didn't apply it to her at all. And also, they didn't apply it probably because it would have made them internationally very, very embarrassed to be persecuting one of the biggest, you know, literary figures, you know, of the world like this. So right now, there was, according to Indian laws, the sedition law, the Supreme Court has put a freeze on the use of that law. So that law can't be used. The other things of which she was accused, they are things which they have a statute of limitation and that is over. So they have had to invent, they have had to accuse her under an anti-terror law. So, you know, after the fact. I don't think they are, you know, preparing for, they were already doing a very widespread crackdown. This, I think, may be an attempt to, you know, sort of bring Kashmir up at the center again and say, okay, there are terrorists and she supports those terrorists and so on, maybe. But not sure about that. But I think that, look, he's not, Modi government is going to continue to do very dangerous things. His allies are not going to stop him there. They will, you know, they will hedge their bets. They're just bargaining to get more out of him. But the very fact that there is those fault lines, that he has to negotiate with them, that if they don't get what they want, then they can say, oh, we are against this or we are against that. And that itself means that the media narrative also is fractured. The media can't just cover what Modi is saying and not what his allies are saying. They have to. So you can see that the media is also trying to catch up with what's happening, and first they tried to behave like things are as usual, and now they are trying to catch up and re-figure this out. So I think that absolutely authoritarian power, you know, it may take a beating now, but it's not at all easy to dislodge. But I do think that the fact that they too, Modi too, is having to rethink strategies. And frankly, I don't think they are very clear. That's the best part, that I don't think they are absolutely clear about their path ahead as well. Who to blame? For things in India, well, till yesterday, they didn't have to blame anybody because, according to the media, none of it was happening. There was no unemployment. Oh, farmers, farmers protesting, they're all paid by, you know, foreign agents or by Soros or by, you know, or by Sikh terrorists or by, you know, Rihanna. Rihanna is, you know, she's Rihanna and Greta Thunberg. Yeah, so they tweeted for the farmers. So they said, look, there's an international toolkit which is telling people how to, you know, target the Modi. He could just say this, the media would do all that for him. He didn't have to open his mouth to say anything because officially these problems didn't exist. So now the very fact that he will find that harder to do because the opposition has a larger presence in parliament. He could earlier pass laws and the opposition was so small that even if they walked out, it would look as though, oh, the whole, you know, the majority is in support of this and these people are just sulking. But now that isn't the case. There is a much more substantial opposition. So it just means, I think, that the game is on, and this time, you know, the other side has a little bit more room to fight, more confidence to fight, and if we don't know exactly what road is ahead, even they don't, you know. So. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Thank you. I want to step aside a bit from democratic issues, and I just realized that my personal knowledges about Indian culture and history are quite narrow and I would say superficial, and so I wanted to ask you about some recommendations of authors or maybe books about Indian culture and history for us Ukrainians to read and to get to know India better.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, maybe what I should do is like, you know, put together a small list which could circulate later, because I could think of, you know, different kinds of things that may be useful. But I think, you know, very you know, to begin with, it depends on which. It's such a vast thing. But I think just of interest, I mean, if one were interested in reading about Indian history or the history of South Asia, then maybe these very basic, this great historian called Romila Thapar, her works on South Asian history, and those are really good and really interesting. Then there are more, you know, books about, if one were interested about India's colonial experience, then I would recommend Well, actually, it's a great podcast which makes these connections. It's called the Empire Podcast. So it's a podcast which began after the invasion of Ukraine. So it starts, I think, with Russian imperialism. So it starts with the Russian Empire, but then it goes, and that's it's a historian, it's a well-known British historian of India, and an Indian origin journalist. So they have this conversation and they get experts on. So they have an absolutely cracking, wonderful series on different times in India. So the Mughal rulers, so various kinds of in Indian history since maybe the 14th century onwards. So they have a whole series on that, and they have a series on the British colonial period. So I would say for a starting point, that would be fantastic to start. And they give book recommendations too. One of the things which I wrote something which was more of a primer for Indians on women, on gender. So it isn't so much about, it isn't just about culture, but it is of course about women and feminism. Sadly, I forgot to bring even a single copy here, which I could have at least, but I'll send it over. Maybe if there's a library, then it can be here.
It would be amazing.
Why? Because I wrote it as a corrective for Indians themselves, because you tend to think about, Indian violence against women in cultural terms in a very narrow sense. So they think, oh, this community is very conservative, or these are not modern forms of oppression, and all kinds of things, problems with the way in which you think about this, and outside India also. So I tried to write it as a way to look a little differently at those issues, and not think of culture as something which is in a very stereotypical way, but in a way that allows us as Indians or as Hindus or Muslims to look a little within ourselves, instead of always thinking, oh, ours is fine and theirs is the problem, so which happens a lot in India. But I found after I wrote it that it was helping even, for instance, people in other countries who also think that way, so they think, oh, the problem of sexual violence is there in India, it's a terrible problem in India. And of course it's a terrible problem in India, and in very specific ways, but it is a problem everywhere. So to look at India and understand it should be from a place of solidarity, saying, okay, we have the problem, so do you, how can we learn to fight it together? Rather than from the place of, oh, this is this exotic place where, there's some cultural thing which we can't understand, and so I'll go and set that right. And we in India do it amongst our own communities. So I think that book might help you. It's called Fearless Freedom. I'll leave a copy in the library for sure.
Yes, thank you. And I wonder, maybe Ola would add something to the list, because you've studied India, and I'm sure you have a list of a few dozen items.
I was thinking when Kavita was thinking about argumentative Indian by Amartya Sen.
Yes,
so it might be a bit easier for the starters here.
Yes, that's useful.
Because Rumila Thapar, frankly, you need to have some knowledge, background knowledge, to start reading her books. And maybe from the Ukrainian side, there is 50 incarnations. So the author is the historian, British historian of Indian origin.
Dalrymple.
No, not Dalrymple. Dalrymple, but by the way, Dalrymple we have in Ukrainian now. It's
yes, he was translated by Artemy Deineko.
So yeah, with Dalrymple we now
so
have
the podcast is also Dalrymple. So the book is called 50 Incarnations, so it's about the 50 heroes of India. We'll just Google and tell you the name. Oh, Bohdam, you know that? No, it's just. So these were the first books that helped me to open and as a starter, for example, and then come to Rumila Thapar.
Thank you. We have time for another question. Natalie, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you and congratulations, Kavita, for your many struggles, and full of admiration, and for defending women's rights in particular. I was wondering, it's a half comment, half question. I was wondering if, and I have not yet read your book, so I was wondering whether, to a certain extent, your message is, let's rediscover that fundamental rights, fundamental freedoms are universal. They are universal. They are not Western, they're not Northern Hemisphere, they're not white, they are universal. And there's a beautiful document that enshrined them after the Second World War, which is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights. And so I was wondering, is that perhaps a document that we should all be rediscovering?
Well, you've kind of put your finger on it, because half jokingly, what I tell people when they tell me, okay, on the left, one used to be able to say, okay, you're a Marxist-Leninist, or you're a Trotskyite, or you're this, or you're that. So, so they would ask, okay, now you're not on the left, what? So I used to say, well, I think my banner is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I used to say it jokingly, and I also used to say it a little provocatively, because on the left, the idea is that these are liberal, democratic, they're a product of capitalist governments. But the point is, I think that, they are not. They are things that perhaps serve certain kinds of governments, but they are not just ideological products of these governments. And the connections between India's constitution making and these events, between Hindu right-wing ideas and between the opposition to universalism then and now, So I do think that the idea of a universal quest for universal democratic aspirations, let's put it that way, which doesn't mean that if a country has that constitution, that country is, wonderfully democratic. But it is expressing certain aspirations, and aspirations are things which you can add to, which you can expand. So if LGBT rights were not recognized there, you can find. So there's a very beautiful, there are these human rights lawyers in India who used to talk about the insurgent constitution, or the jurisprudence of insurgents. So they were lawyers, but they were of a very radical, revolutionary mindset. But they defended a lot of people who were in fact even Maoist insurgents, among others. But they also they defended the idea of human rights and universal human rights. And when they were asked about it, they said, look, you can either see the Constitution of India or the UDHR as something which is gatekeeping, which is telling you what you can't do, and which is which the state is using to punish you. But they said, but that isn't what it is actually our legacy. And so you can use it actually to limit the power of the state, because that is what these ideas and these principles are there for. So if they are there to limit the power of the state, that is something to defend, always. Because the alternative is that every state has limitless power. And their only check is each other, and not us, not people. So you're absolutely right, I think. that's where I am at right now.
This is a beautiful thought to keep in mind while we are parting. Sorry, it's a beautiful point for us to thank our fantastic speakers for their time, their fight, their solidarity. And thank you all for coming and for being with us tonight, and for listening and for all your questions. Thank you to the Center for Urban History, and please look up Index Institute for Documentation and Exchange. I would be delighted to see you at our events when we are up and running, and hope to see some of you at Ruta soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.